Mr. President, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, may I firstly congratulate you, Mr. President, on reaching the final debate of your term in office, and thank you for your hard work in making sure that the debates here at the Oxford Union have been incredibly successful over the last few weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, it falls to me as the proposer of the motion this evening that the House believes that socialism does not work, to begin by introducing the opposition. So I'm very pleased to introduce my colleagues on the opposition benches this evening. To begin with Ben Sullivan, who is the librarian of Christchurch and I believe is the president-elect of the Oxford Union starting from tomorrow. My colleague, the Labour Member of Parliament for Ayrshire North and Arran, is Katie Clark. He's also a member of the Speakers panel in the House of Commons. So we are colleagues on that particular panel, and she is also a former legal officer of Unison. And then we have the leader of the British Communist Party, Robert Griffiths, sitting over here. He was the one that didn't toast the Queen at the dinner prior to the debate this evening. And finally, it is a pleasure for me to introduce to you my colleague, and I say also a friend, which is Jeremy Corbyn, member for Islington North. Islington North, described here as one of the most left-wing and rebellious Labour MPs. Well, that's probably true, but I have to say he is a man of integrity, and I'm proud to work with him on the issue of the Chagos Islands and the return of those people that were ejected from their homeland by a Labour government in the 1960s. But Jeremy, it's a pleasure to see you. And so, if I now begin with the proposition, which is this House believes that socialism does not work. Mr. President, socialism is an ideology that has always led to the absolute opposite of what its proponents claim they wish to achieve. Far from ending poverty, socialism creates poverty. Instead of upholding freedom, socialism destroys the very liberty that our forebears fought and died to defend. Socialists always hand power from the people to the state. They spend money they do not have, create a culture of dependency rather than self-reliance, undermine traditions, conventions and institutions that have stood the test of time. And when things go pear-shaped, as they always do, socialists usually resort to the power and might of the state against the people themselves. It was the words of wisdom spoken by President Abraham Lincoln, which I believe best illustrates the fundamental flaws contained within the ideology of socialism, when he said that you cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich. You cannot further the brotherhood of man by inciting class hatred. You cannot build character and courage by destroying men's initiative and independence. And you cannot help men permanently by doing for them what they could and should do for themselves. These very words, Mr. President, inspired Margaret Thatcher, so much that she always carried them around with her. And she, of course, was the person that fought to end Britain's post-war experiment with socialism that had, by the 1970s, brought our great nation to its knees. I grew up in the 1970s, and throughout that period, I witnessed the failures and the catastrophe caused by socialist thinking, which had such a detrimental effect on ordinary working people, the very people that socialist ideas were meant to help. Now, a cruel deception lies embedded in socialism's promises of equality for all, free and extensive public services, and even the spread of wealth among other nations are in principle the desires, of course, of all politicians. We all want to see those things. But of course, I understand how these objectives may appeal to most people. But there is, sadly, one problem with all of that. Put bluntly, it's claptrap, it's balderdash, it's bunkum, doesn't work. Socialism, indeed, doesn't work. It has never worked, and however many governments and however many nations try these experiments, they always end in failure. Let's take Jamaica as a case in point, where a socialist movement there promised so much, but delivered nothing more than total economic collapse and handed deeper poverty back to those whom they pledged to make richer. The heightening inflation of 1973, leading to an unforgiving recession a year later, was directly influenced by the flawed policies of socialism. Last year I met the Most Honourable Edward Seaga, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, who served between 1980 and 89, and I asked him why Jamaica had gone from being the most prosperous Caribbean nation to a basket case. And he answered simply, we dabbled in socialism. And Mr. President, here in Britain, the former Labour government, despite their rhetoric, actually followed the same old bankrupt socialist agenda, dressed up as New Labour. We as a country observed over a decade of unsustainable government spending and a running of a budget deficit which drove our economy into the ground. Socialists pledge to give so much to society, yet it is the empty promises made by them which in the end leave the poor even poorer. As our greatest Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, once said, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. Leaving Britain with a debt worth over 80% of GDP and a deficit of over £120 billion, the last Labour government spent the money of every taxpayer, including the country's poorest, and borrowed billions to make up the shortfall. Again, socialist ideology, which continues to run through the veins of the Labour Party, as I'm sure some members here present this evening will be proud to believe in. But it has resulted, ultimately, in widespread hardship. Indeed, Mr. President, a betrayal of the very poorest in our society. And also, socialism, I believe, has a sinister side as well. So often in recent history, we have seen socialism lead to the misery of dictatorship and totalitarianism. It is undeniable that in the last century, socialism has also played a part in the formation of evil dictatorships, whether communist, Marxist, Leninist, or other forms of state-control socialism. Today, we still see countries all over the world who remain so far behind the nations of the capitalist free world due to socialist ideology that has led to their ruination. There is no better example of that than Zimbabwe, once the breadbasket of Africa, now destroyed by socialist megalomania. And today, Mr. President, we can also see, just over the English Channel, how flawed socialism is, as has been shown in France under President Hollande. With the introduction of the 70% tax rate, he has discouraged wealth creators, causing an exodus in enterprise and investment. So you see, Mr. President, socialism is simply counterproductive and almost always leads to the suffering and misery of the people, and even sometimes the establishment of the cruelest regimes the world has ever seen. On the contrary to that, of course, the capitalist system, with all its faults, I freely admit, provides the organic growth in a free society, where people have the opportunity to prosper through their own efforts, having the incentive to work hard and to provide a better life for themselves and their families, something which the state is never able to do. Indeed, it is freedom that creates the conditions for prosperity and a better life for all our peoples. Mr. President, socialism simply doesn't work. As Sir Winston Churchill so rightly observed, socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. I beg to support the motion.
Thank you very much.